What is at the core of time travel fiction? Unsurprisingly, the answer to that has changed with the passage of both time and media. In the 80s, Back to the Future used the idea as a relatable power fantasy. A powerful notion, no doubt, as every one of us has at some point wanted desperately to undo or redo some pivotal moment in our lives. To swing the fulcrum of the past with the full leverage provided by our future perfect knowledge. As time went on, audiences matured, and filmmakers too. The nature and purpose of time travel in media has changed. While without thought you might draw the conclusion that the advance of time travel media has been hand in hand with the advance of science. This is sometimes the case, but the purpose of time travel in narratives has always been, first and foremost, thematic. Those evolved purposes tied in well with more mature themes, changing from a desire to change the past self to acceptance of the self, acknowledging that what is done, and nothing, not even time travel, can change our lives. And the only choice we really have is to deny our failures and live in a world of delusions, or accept what has happened and find a way to grow from our mistakes. Quantum Break seeks to upset even that established paradigm, to break those norms and return to a world where anything is possible. Break mirrors Alan Wake insomuch as it began as something else before being hammered into its present form. And this time it started as a sequel for the aforementioned Alan Wake. Alan Wake 2 would not be picked up, unfortunately, Microsoft being wary of the property after its lackluster commercial outcome, and so it would ask Remedy to make a new property instead, one that would accommodate numerous timelines and outcomes. This time, the transformation would not so benefit Quantum Break, awkwardly cramming in numerous elements of the pitch for Wake without as much thinking about how they would be adapted to the narrative framing of Quantum Break, despite the seeming synergy. When Wake 2 originally pitched itself, Remedy envisioned it as a TV show video game hybrid. And that is the element of the original game rather unfortunately preserved most completely in Break, as it was the element that the publisher Microsoft found intriguing. This isn't the only element that wouldn't quite work out in Break, as choice and consequence will likewise be ham-fistedly shoved into the game's narrative. Damn the outcome. This is by and far the game that seemed to trouble Remedy the most, as many of its elements ended up in conflict with one another. But to figure out exactly what went wrong with Break, let's get into what the game was actually like. Quantum Break begins how every Remedy game has begun up till now, at the ending. I began skeptical of this because it seemed with Alan Wake we meaningfully finished up Remedy's relationship with the concept of fatalism. But I will say, it turns out there's a little more gas in that idea than I originally gave them credit for, and they use the theme here well to advance the core ideas of Quantum Break. The circumstances of this origin are, however, opaque, and it is when we are thrown into the shoes of Jack Joyce that Break can finally start. Jack Joyce is our vessel for this journey, portrayed by the actor Shawn Ashmore to somewhat dismal effect. I cannot say I typically care for Ashmore's performance. He always comes across a little disinterested, and this case is no different. Ashmore portrays Jack Joyce with all the enthusiasm of a real actor, contemptuously playing a character in a video game movie. This isn't helped by the fact that Joyce is by and far Remedy's blandest protagonist. Every one of Remedy's protagonists up to this point has been entirely defined by the tropes of their genre, but they remained well defined nonetheless. However, I can tell you with certainty that Jack Joyce is no Marty McFly. It's insinuated that he has spent the last number of years in a very Bruce Wayne from Batman Begins scenario, complete with dead parents. But that's all we really know about him, and judging from how willing and ready he is to start killing random strangers, it certainly doesn't seem he spent those years in quiet meditation upon the nature of existence. It might be worth giving Shawn Ashmore some benefit of the doubt for his role in this case, as the character really does not seem particularly well realized. If you've watched my video on Alan Wake, you will know that I go on at length about Remedy's expertise at scene building, and while that is on display in Quantum Break, it is utilized in entirely different ways, and that immediate immersion that Wake grants the player is largely absent from many of the areas you will explore in Break. The first area is an excellent example of that, where Wake's first couple scenes were dynamic, both literally with many wonderful set-piece moments found within, and more broadly with its characters that immediately spark wild interest and speculation in the heart of the player. Break scenes are content to be visually evocative without much of that remaining flair thrown in. Jack has been called by a trusted friend, Paul Serene, in a cryptic time of need to a college campus. This campus, like many of Revenie's works, is entirely unafraid just to tell you the things it took influence from, with a protest going on to stop a library from being torn down. In case Break isn't making itself clear enough, I'll just leave this bit from Back to the Future here. Unlike in the case of Wake and the RR Diner, however, the connections here are only skin deep, with little thematic or narrative connection to Back to the Future. This ends up feeling more like a moment for the audience to go, "I know that," before moving on. I'd like to take a moment to ruminate on some of the issues with Quantum Break scenes, as well as what it is they get right. The first problem is the sheer length and dullness of the game's many logs. I praised one of the pages from Wake for effectively providing incredible nuance to what might have otherwise been a meaningless side character in only 20 seconds of spoken dialogue. One of the first logs you can find in Break, however, is over 1 minute and 20 seconds when read aloud, while being almost entirely meaningless to expanding its subject. The saddest part is this is hardly the last time Remedy will show themselves to be deficient in an area they previously showed themselves to be immensely competent in previous titles. Audio logs and TV shows have seen an overhaul to be much blander. Wake's charismatic radio host and absolutely oddball TV segments have both been removed in favor of more dry, plot-expanding radio, and one ad for Alan Wake. A byproduct of the choice system and integrated TV show respectively, these losses are both keenly felt, as I will discuss in the gameplay section why the radio segments are so much more poorly paced, not that I have much desire to listen to them anyways. Not only that, but audio logs have a new problem unique to this game, for Remedy at least. Numerous characters and other sources of audio chatter now frequently overlap with one another, a problem Remedy has avoided in every game up till now, but not so much here.
Sorry, Jack. They forced me to do it.
I know. There's nothing you could have done.
That map over there should help you figure out a route.
Remedy getting this wrong is baffling, and I think it shows the lack of polish this game got. Quantum Break really does feel just a little unfinished, and we'll see that throughout numerous parts of this critique. All of this put together with flatter sound design in the calmer segments of Quantum Break trades in the scenes from previous Remedy games that I never wanted to leave and loved immersing myself in, and instead leaves me with a resounding meh. The attention this time seems to have entirely been paid to the design of the titular Quantum Breaks. Referred to in-game as stutters, I can only imagine the vast majority of the game's budget and time was poured liberally into these scenes, as the artistry on display is absolutely masterful. Framed around moments in time when its passage has ceased, each of these stutters, especially the outside scenes, are works of art worthy of enshrinement all their own. Colors are used with a calculated recklessness, breaking, shifting, and distorting, as numerous realities and moments in time are frozen, stretching out in maddening beauty. Wreckage spills out in front of you, each moment of disaster caught like a fly in ointment. Each stutter is unique, beautiful, and deserving of every ounce of praise that can be heaped upon them. Looking at them, I feel this is where Remedy's passion really laid for this endeavor, and much of the game must have been built around these incredibly imaginative set pieces. That is pure speculation on my part, but it wouldn't be the first time that a game was built more on concept art than design documents. One of these mid-game sets sees you walk through an area where time is completely broken, shifting to one moment after another as you move through its space. While every stutter is unique, this scene is singular, even among such breathtaking settings. Watching time unfold around you evokes the feeling of the difficult-to-visualize concept of what it must be like to move through time as we move through space. Remedy really does what they do best here, in thrusting their player into sensations that none else can capture. But the big question is it any fun? My first impressions of the gameplay of Quantum Break were not especially positive. Introducing cover, which never goes especially well in my book, but after getting Jack's first few powers, things really turn around. Gameplay is a ballet of dashing, slowing, shielding, and exploding. While none of the powers you have meaningfully fit into the narrative frame of the game, all of them have tremendous impact and are incredibly fun to use. Watching enemies lose track of you as you stop time to flank them, stacking an overwhelming barrage of bullets in a moment of time to release them all at once, and watching enemies explode in a stuttery mess of broken time really never gets old. It turns out the cover system isn't even particularly obnoxious, mostly just there for a short breather before going out dashing, dodging, and shielding once again. Unfortunately, it isn't all roses, as the actual gunplay is, well, very bad. Most weapons are only able to fire 1 or 2 bullets at a reasonable accuracy before devolving into hipfire that consumes almost the entire screen, and the way that bullets go to their targets is odd. They'll go straight through cover when aimed properly, and straight through enemies if the cursor isn't placed exactly on them. I understand this is how hipfire typically works, but it usually feels a bit better in most games. The low accuracy of most weapons means that the vast majority of the arsenal feels bad to use, with the exception of the marksman's rifle and advanced SMG, which were the only weapons I used for the remainder of the game after acquiring them, as everything else feels absolutely terrible to shoot. There also seem to be odd dead zones on most enemy hitboxes, where even though you are aiming at them, a hit is not registered when firing. This is especially true of the heavies and backpack-wearing enemies, as much of their shoulders and parts of their backpacks respectively registering nothing when hit. The difficulty is quite low throughout most of the game, even on hard, with a notable exception of the final and only boss, which drops insta-kill time warps on you that can hit you in an entirely different area code like there's no tomorrow. Pacing throughout the action levels is incredibly stilted. In previous Remedy titles, the developers knew exactly how to stop the player and get them to soak in the numerous scenes around them, whether that was in the more active segments or the slower ones. Here, however, the removal of the amusing minute-or-so-long TV shows, and radios now only being placed in the narrative segments, makes the action-oriented areas more of a slog. The only thing breaking up the pacing being awkward and basic platforming elements. When taken in conjunction with Joyce regularly getting stuck on terrain and generally moving pretty awkwardly, the whole thing feels, again, unfinished. Like there was a good 1 or 2 more passes of polish that needed to be applied to gunplay and character movement before this thing went out. Circling back to Jack's arrival at the college, the thing Paul Serene called him here to help with should come as no surprise at this point. It's a time machine. A time machine that, in a bout of unconstrained coincidence that I loathe, was designed largely by Jack's brother, William, but funded and completed by the comparatively scientifically adept Serene. Despite warning from William, Paul Serene goes ahead with the maiden voyage of the time machine, and it begins to break down the imaginary space-time fabric that the game calls the Meyer-Joyce field. But not before William comes out of the time machine to try and stop all this. You see, time and quantum break isn't an abstract concept, but a real, tangible resource fueled by chronons generated from some sort of timey-wimey field generator thing. All of this is absolute nonsense, but so is the flux capacitor, so I can't complain that much. This time machine malfunction bathes both Joyce and Serene in chronons, essentially granting them superpowers. I find the framing of Jack's powers odd, as the game frames him more as a superhero than anything, and this is backed by the fact that many of the abilities he manifests have very little to do with time. I know every review of this game mentions the absolute absurdity of things like a time shield and time explosion, especially since you could make a time shield conceivable power, and the hows of that are even demonstrated in the first scene where Jack manifests his powers, but then he actually gets the time shield and actually just acts like a shield that, deflects bullets for no reason and no explanation instead of drastically slowing bullets as they get near you. Just why? Just why? But let me offer a plausible, if unfounded, explanation for this. Many things in the gameplay of Break mirror that of Alan Wake. Most notably, a series of Monarch soldiers that have powers that mimic Jack, but not only that, mimic the fast taken from Alan Wake. This leads me to believe that at least some of Joyce's powers were lifted from design notes for Alan Wake 2. As if you imagine these powers being wielded as some aspect of the darkness Alan is able to co-opt, they make much more sense. Instead of a time shield, a shield of darkness that is shown to work almost exactly as the time shield does. Instead of a time dash, a shift of darkness, again exactly as the fast taken move. Break powers would fit almost perfectly into the logic of Alan Wake, and again I want to say I have no basis for this, but it seems very plausible to me. Later in this scene is when the Paul Serene we will be dealing with for most of the game appears, revealing himself as the head of the shady Monarch Corporation. Having been trapped in the past after the time machine disaster, he built Monarch using his vast well of financial and historical knowledge to get rich quick. I want to take this moment to mention that I find Serene to be equally as underwritten as our protagonist, but Aidan Gillian does at least bring some life to the villain. While not his best work, he is at least putting in some effort. Paul insists that time is ending, and that the consequence of the time machine trial is that the stutters that are causing time to stop momentarily will grow worse and worse until their effects are permanent, ceasing the passage of time for all eternity. Your first thought is likely, why bother to go through all this at all? Why not just have stopped the trial instead? Serene insists that time cannot be changed, that everything that has happened has always happened and will happen again no matter how hard you try to intervene, insisting that trying to stop or change events of the past will lead you to only become a party to those events. So, despite William Joyce saying that he has a way to stop the end of time, Serene kills him, As for the whys on that, William has made a device he calls the countermeasure, that he believes can fix the fracture and stop the end of time. But Serene denies this, saying that he has seen the disaster, and since time cannot be changed, it must happen. Anyways, he has his own designs for this countermeasure incompatible with William's. Jack refuses to accept that time cannot be changed, and much of the plot for the next bit pertains to him finding another time machine created by his brother, and discovering the countermeasure and creating a plan to steal it. It is during this time that Beth Wilder, one of the game's more interesting characters, comes into focus. Beth has been working undercover in Monarch to undermine their operation, with the ultimate goal of protecting William and Jack long enough for them to trigger the countermeasure. She reveals there's quite a bit more going on with her, and it is with her that the immutability of time is really demonstrated. The reason she possesses her foreknowledge is that when she was a child, a future version of herself gave her a notebook with many events and notes on what will happen recorded for her to read. So much of this notebook is terribly sad, recording event after event that she wishes she could change, but how she will, even with all this foreknowledge, be unable to do so. And so the girl she passes it to will be equally unable to stop the death of loved ones, avoid personal failures, or stop greater tragedies. In Beth, we see ourselves in focus, as a significant part of her journal pertains to 9/11, and how angry she will be that there is nothing she can do to stop it. How she will see a truly massive tragedy in front of her, knowing that it will come, but being unable to do anything. Why is this important? Surely there is no massive impending tragedy in our time that we can clearly see a way to stop, but are largely personally incapable of fixing. Right? During their plot to kidnap a Monarch bigwig in order to repair William's broken time machine and retrieve the countermeasure, Jack learns of Serene's plan to survive the end of time. Serene has planned to create a lifeboat of sorts, a bubble of real time inside the apocalypse, wherein he and many of Monarch's staff can survive for hundreds of years as the last bastion of humanity outside of time, and hopefully find a way to repair the fracture. But that seems largely a disingenuous goal compared to the primary of just living another day. Paul Serene in general comes across as very Elon Musk-esque, and to me this solidifies the parallel, as Musk and many of the other super-rich believe themselves above the crises facing Earth and its inhabitants. After all, they have enough money and smarts to just go live on the moon or Mars or whatever after they've used up all the resources here and burnt the world to a crisp, right? One could say the ultra-rich have a serenity in the face of oncoming world-destroying climate change. It is indeed in these segments that the game's themes become clear. That the greatest enemy in the effort to keep the planet and the only place we all have to live alive is serenity, born from vast overconfidence or pessimism. In the context of the plot, Jack Joyce might be an idiot, but he's at least willing to do something, and it is his efforts that finally prove everyone wrong. For all the time everyone says the future cannot be changed, that what is set is set, he ultimately undoes everything that Serene says was inevitable. He finds the countermeasure, saves his brother, and changes the future for the better, because he took the first and most difficult step, believing. It might sound trite or even ridiculous, but the overwhelming message of Quantum Break seems to me to be thus. Maybe there is no hope. Maybe the end will come no matter what. But the best way to ensure that that happens is giving up and giving in. When you believe the end is coming, I can guarantee it is. But when you take that small tentative step to hoping for something better, you take the first and most vital step to making real change in the world around you. I would like to leave it at that and heap mostly praise upon Quantum Break and its story. But But that synopsis of the plot's themes generously precluded many aspects of the narrative that keep it from reaching its full potential. The first major setback is the decision structure. Yes, in this game about fatalism and the main character developing hope in the face of an immutable future, the antagonist that swears time is unchangeable regularly changes the future to suit his whims. Odder still is the framing of the choice and consequence system as you take on the role of Paul Serene to make decisions for him and Monarch. In a unique twist, Paul is able to see the future impact of his decisions both to him and Joyce. But to call these decisions isn't exactly right. Most of these decisions almost have an objectively right and wrong answer. The best example of this is the final choice. Paul has a degenerative condition resulting from his exposure to chronons, and near the end he is betrayed by his second-in-command, Martin Hatch, who destroys all but one of his remaining treatments for this condition. The choice presented is to take the treatment and survive to carry out this lifeboat plan, or let madness take hold and not take the treatment. This isn't a decision. There isn't a moment before madness takes hold where you can just stop and shrug and go, well, being more of a psychopath sounds good. Let's get more of that going on. This is more or less the crux of all the decisions. Either Serene makes a rational choice or gives in to his Chronon syndrome. And unsurprisingly, these decisions feel hollow because they make no sense as choices. Even worse, there's still almost no impact on the game. Some elements of dialogue change, and some scenes in the TV show change, but that's about it. There's no real consequence for any decision, and by the end, whatever decisions you make are all erased and unified into one ending. Another major problem I have is the dead end of Martin Hatch and the Shifters. Shifters are Chronon-infused individuals like Jack Serene that have become overwhelmed by Chronon sickness and become shifting masses of time and multiple causal points, all converging into a single entity. They are described as singularities that hunt other individuals touched by chronons who are functionally immortal, as every time they die, all they do is shred one possible version of themselves from reality. The only way to stop them is create a scenario where there is no possible escape, and every reality they could exist in leads to their demise. A fascinating concept that builds the visage of a terrifying antagonist, which you never confront. Despite them being repeatedly teased and having an entire level where you followed the destructive path of a shifter who has displaced hundreds of Monarch soldiers, the entire concept is just thrown away. Moments before you are forced to face one, regular time resumes and the threat is banished in a moment of terrifying anticlimax, and they're never seen again. The end. All of this is further complicated when Martin Hatch, played by the incredibly entertaining Lance Reddick, is revealed to have been working against Monarch because he was a shifter that came into existence through a naturally occurring time machine that he found eons ago, but found solace at the end of time, managing to reconstruct himself into some kind of quantum superposition, where he believes bringing about the end of time will allow humans to progressively become shifters and ultimately find peace like he did and gain ultimate power as quantum entities. But despite finding this out, Jack is just chill with Hatch in the end, despite knowing that he is a quantum murder demon who wants to end all time. While some of this is obvious sequel baiting, most of it just comes across as the remnants of a rushed production. The game is incredibly short, clocking in at just about 6 hours, and nothing really feels finished. The story has myriad loose ends, the gameplay is janky, and the PC port is pretty terrible. Just look at this footage. I don't know if this will come across on YouTube, but everything just looks blurry. I don't have upscaling on, and this is being rendered in 2560 by 1440, but everything outside of a few scenes just looks fuzzy. I'm told this is due to motion blur, which you cannot disable, but that looks worse than just motion blur to me. It's a shame we got this game in the state we did, because there is the typical Remedy metaphor-laden plot, impressive visuals, and fun gameplay they bring to the table. But everything just feels a month or a few years short of being truly finished. Even what praise I did heap upon the plot has nothing to do with the TV show attached to Quantum Break. While I praised Alan Wake's TV tie-in for being a wonderful appetizer to the main game, being a brief 30-ish minute show you could watch at your leisure, which are meaningfully set up and tied into the game's plot and themes, Quantum Break the episodic show is slow, cheap, pedantic, irrelevant, and annihilates the pacing of the game. The show primarily revolves around several side characters that make very little appearance in the game. I know they have names, but in my notes I called them Hacker Man, Family Guy, and Thirsty Girl. So that's what we're going to call them because I have no idea what their names were, and if the show hasn't made me care about them after watching it nearly 3 times, I refuse to call them by their real names. The struggles of these characters play out as the most rote and tropey and flat storytelling I've ever seen. The reason I call Family Guy is that the one meaningful character trait he has is that he has a pregnant wife. That's it. If you can list one more trait that he possesses, feel free to list it, because in my mind, he is absolutely one note, and his entire conflict is trying to get him and his wife into the lifeboat after one dude thinks he betrayed Monarch because he was near Beth. Never mind that he was pointing a gun at her, that doesn't matter, he's a traitor now, and action can happen as a result. That describes so much of this show. A thing happens for some nonsensical reason so that action can happen and you feel as though the show went on some kind of an arc. None of the interesting time travel fiction is present in this time show. None of the nuanced themes about corporate greed or ambivalence or the ending of the world. Just cheaply manufactured, poorly produced melodrama. And yet it takes so long to get anywhere. There's so much padding and nothing happening that, hell, the CW wouldn't pick up this show, it's so mad. Winding back to the choice and consequence, this series is primarily where the results of your choices are played out. Usually in brief scenes near the beginning, so the rest of the show can play out as scheduled. Unsurprisingly, this makes me care even less about these decisions, as they are played out in a largely irrelevant sideshow. Just about the only time I cared about watching this show is when it actually plays out the scenarios and plot of the main game. When it does so, it can actually add some amount of gravitas and depth to what's going on in the part of the game you actually care about. But that's probably about 5 to 10% of the whole production. I realized this was probably to keep production costs low by not needing the star actors there for the vast majority of scenes. Except for Lance Reddick, who, his rates must not be that high, he's just in any old stuff. And speaking of low production values, boy, you feel the budget of this show was on. Action is mostly underwhelming, relying on jump cuts and fast edits to imply action rather than show it. The sets look quite cheap. The lifeboat is a perfect example of this. The rest of Monarch is a futuristic, ultra-modern feast for the eyes, whereas their opus, the lifeboat, looks like an abandoned old mall with lots of sheets draped over the closed shops. I unironically would rather have had a production of the game's in-universe parody Time Knife than this show. You know what? That's what's on the screen right now. Time Knife. Enjoy watching me stand there doing nothing but laughing at Time Knife while I finish it. Feel free to skip the show if you have any interest in playing this game after that. I would really recommend that. It's not good. And its pointless diversions really do meaningfully break the flow of the plot of Quantum Break, leaving it feeling a much weaker plot than it really is. By the time you resume playing, you almost need another show to remind you of what was going on in Quantum Break the game after watching 30 minutes of Quantum Break the show. What was meant to add depth and nuance only slows and disturbs the pacing of what's actually a mostly fine and interesting time travel narrative. I like the plot of Quantum Break. It's interesting, full of all the fun time travel beats and setups, with a meaningful metaphor about its subject matter. But I hate Quantum Break that feels like it spends 2 hours telling a story that makes little sense with characters I could not care less about, and having nothing at all to do with time travel. Break is a game with interesting themes, but which is constantly at war with itself. Its story is at war with those themes. Its desire to be presented as a TV show is at war with its desire to be presented as a video game. Every single choice is at odds with another. Break's inability to focus on its strength ultimately leaves it feeling like a project that just worked in too many directions at once, none of which stand out well on their own. There is something worthwhile at the core of Break, though. An unwavering optimism and message of hope for the future, no matter how bleak it seems. And if you can wade through the trenches of its contradictions, there is a kernel of a game worth playing inside Quantum Break. So that is Quantum Break done. All done. I debated on doing it for a while because it really is just such a strange game, and but I think there was more here to look at than I really anticipated. One thing of note that I couldn't figure out anywhere to put was that there's no Poets of the Fall in this entire game. Neither is there a sequence where you battle enemies to rock music. Both are pretty big losses, and they make this really feel like the least Remedy game, I think, their absence, in the absence of that kind of sequence. But yeah, I really appreciate you watching, and obviously we're going to be doing Control next, so I'll be getting onto that as soon as possible. And wait, what's all this stuff at the end? Why is there so much time left at the end? That's curious. Well, I mean, that's probably irrelevant. It's probably just a bug or something. So anyways, again, I really appreciate you listening, and I hope you have a good one. And now for a dramatic reading of Time Knife, written by Bruce Livingstone. Act 1, Interior Office, Night. Bruce Savage stands in his office. He is sexually attractive. Somebody knocks on Bruce's door and he opens it. It is a scientist lady. She looks like a librarian with glasses, but she is actually a scientist. You can tell because she has a lab coat. Help me. Okay. Take this knife because some bad apples are trying to steal it, and it is very important. Okay. What is your name, handsome? I'm Bruce. Let's shake hands. Bruce and scientist lady shake hands. Wow, you almost broke my hand with that handshake. You are definitely a tough guy. She is impressed with Bruce's strength. She looks at his biceps like they are large, delicious pieces of ham, but she doesn't want to eat them. Here is the knife. The lady scientist hands Bruce the knife. It is mostly like a knife, but also like a time machine, because it is both a knife and a time machine, but Bruce doesn't know that yet. Goons break in through the windows and shoot at the scientist lady. She dies. Avenge me! Okay. Bruce kills the goons with his legs by doing lots of kicking at them. They are dead real quick. Looks like I got a leg up on you guys. The audience probably laughs here, so Bruce waits to deliver his next line for about 5 seconds so that everyone has calmed down. What is so special about this knife? Bruce stabs the knife into a chair. The chair disappears. The chair disappeared. He looks at the picture on the wall, a big photograph from 1932 with lots of people in it from 1932 in it. Bruce's chair is in the picture. Interesting. My chair traveled back in time to 1932 when I stabbed it. When I stab things, they travel through time. That explains why this knife looks like a knife, but is also a time machine, because it is both. Bruce's real goofy friend from across the hall runs into the room. He trips on something on the floor. His name is Slavo. He isn't as fat as his name sounds. Oh yeah! That is Slavo's catchphrase, and he says it in a real funny way. Bruce, you saved my life. The scientist lady was only faking to be dead. Are you married? Only to my job. I find that attractive, but also respectable. She kisses Bruce's cheek. What about my cheek? Oh, man! That is Slavo's other catchphrase, which he says in a different but equally funny way. Bruce waits a few seconds for the audience to stop laughing before he speaks. Wait, those were man lips, not woman lips. Bruce pulls off the scientist lady's wig. She is actually Bruce's boss, Paul Marine. Paul Marine is a douche. My boss, but why? I wanted you to kill those guys because they wanted me dead. I knew you were real tough, so you could kill them easy. But I don't respect you as an employee, so I always make you do the stinky jobs, even though you've been working at my company more than most of the guys and are real smart. Also, I don't like you because my girlfriend finds you sexually attractive. Now I understand. Give me back my time knife! Paul Marine snaps his fingers, and 73 goons appear around Bruce. You can't kill 73 goons! Just give up! I don't have time for this. Bruce stabs himself with the time knife and disappears. He used this time travel knife to time travel! Bruce opens the door. Now he is twice as jacked. You're even more sexually attractive! How is this possible? I stabbed myself and traveled back to the past, then trained in all kinds of martial arts to become even stronger. I also strapped explosives into everybody's boots in the past so that when I press this detonator, you will all explode. Oh, yeah! I'm glad I have stocks in this company. Why? Because business is booming. Bruce presses the detonator. All 73 goons blow up like eggs in a microwave. Paul Marine does not explode. Luckily, I used my metal detector this morning and found the explosives. So I switched the boots with somebody else. Say, Slobbo, whose boots are you wearing? No! Slobbo explodes. My best friend, you will pay for this. You don't want to stab me with that time knife. Why not? Because I'm actually you from the future! That doesn't make sense. Yes, it does. Remember that the time knife is also a time machine. I am you from the future, but I stabbed myself with the knife in order to come back here and do all of this. But we don't look the same. That is a good point, and I'm glad you brought it up. First, I traveled 700 years into the future to a time where humans have created advanced technology that allows surgery that completely changes people's face and bodies. I had this surgery performed so that you wouldn't be able to recognize me, but I am actually you in disguise. I can prove it because I know many things about you. Like what? You have a birthmark on your left ankle. I do have a birthmark on my left ankle. I am starting to believe you now. You should, because even though I have a new body, I kept that birthmark on my ankle so that when I met you, I could prove I was actually you from the future. I will show you. Paul lifts up his left leg of his pants to show there is no birthmark. Instead, there is an ankle holster for a gun. Paul pulls out the gun and aims it at Bruce. I was lying this whole time! I'm not actually you! I was just saying that so I could get my gun! Son of a bitch. Also, in the future, I melted the time knife and turned it into bullets! Those bullets are now in this gun, which means that I can shoot you, but also send you through time all at once! Finally, you will be out of my way so that I can marry my girlfriend, Sophie, later today before you're able to tell her that I'm a real stinky guy. I didn't know you were getting married today. I know. My girlfriend, Sophie, made an invitation for you because she admires you and thinks you're sexually attractive. But I destroyed the invitation and then lied to her and said I gave it to you at work. But now I am here to give you a different invitation. To your funeral! Paul Marine shoots at Bruce. Slavo jumps in front of Bruce. No! Slavo wasn't actually dead. He jumps in front of the bullets and is shot several times. Now he's actually dying. Avenge me! Okay. Bruce goes to attack Paul Marine, but now Paul Marine has disappeared. He's gone. Slavo is dying on the ground covered in blood. His body is like a hot dog covered in lots of ketchup. You must stop the wedding. You're like totally a better guy. Clearly more attractive than Paul. You should be dating his girlfriend, Sophie. Slavo dies. Bruce just sits there next to Slavo for a while because many people will be crying at this point. He eventually gets up. Looks like I'm going to a wedding after all. He holds up the time knife. Someone's gotta cut the cake. Cut the cake clearly means he's going to kill Paul. The audience will understand this because of the way he says it. It's a real intense moment. Bruce puts on his shades. End of Act 1, Time Knife, written by Bruce Livingstone. Act 2. Bruce has just had his best friend killed by his boss, Paul Marine. Bruce now has a time knife that sends things through time if he stabs them. He is going to Paul Marine's wedding now to tell his girlfriend Sophie not to marry him because he's a real stinky guy. Interior wedding, day. It is a wedding. Paul Marine and his girl Sophie are getting married. Sophie is real attractive. If most girls are ham sandwiches, then she is a 16-ounce steak. Bruce enters the wedding building. Stop! Bruce, I'm so happy that you came! You can't marry Paul Marine. He's a real stinky guy. He's lying! I'm not. He killed my best friend with time bullets. But that's impossible. Time travel doesn't exist yet. That's what they want us to think. But I actually have a time knife that is also a time machine and sends things through time when I stab them. I want to believe you, but that doesn't make sense. I will prove it. Bruce stabs Sophine's mom. Here is a bunch of money for lottery tickets. Bruce gives Sophine's mom a bunch of money for lottery tickets. He stabs her with the time knife, but gently, not violently, so she will just travel through time. She disappears. Sophine's mom enters the wedding building. She is now wearing different clothes. He's right. He stabbed me gently with the time knife, and I was sent to the past. He also gave me a bunch of money that I used to buy a lottery ticket that I knew I would win, and now I have $1 million. You helped my mom become rich. Thank you, Bruce. You made me rich from the moment I saw you. Rich in my heart with love. I always loved you most, but Paul Marine and I just got married. You're too late! Or is he? The minister pulls off his mask. He is actually George Washington. Bruce knew you were getting married, so he stabbed himself and traveled to the past, then stabbed me so that I would be sent to that time. I then pretended to be a wedding minister for the ceremony, but I am actually not a minister at all, which means this marriage isn't official. So you did all this for me? Yes, I stabbed George Washington because I love you. Also, the man you were about to marry wasn't actually Paul Marine. Paul Marine also takes off his mask. It's Slavo, Bruce's best friend. This is actually a fake wedding. I saved Slavo's wife and then had him disguise himself as your boyfriend to make it look real. But actually, it was a test to see if you were meant to be. The only thing I was meant to be is your death! Sophie pulls out a gun. She pulls off her mask. It's the real Paul Marine. But how? I followed you to the past using my time bullets and discovered your plan to marry Sophie. So I only married Sophie in the past. She didn't want to, but then I showed her this baby. Paul Marine reveals a baby. I told her this baby was actually our baby from the future, and I used time bullets to travel with the baby back to the past to show her we had a great family together in the future. But in reality, it's just a baby that I stole. It isn't even mine. Then whose baby is it? The real Sophie enters wearing futuristic pants and a shirt. Ours. Are you Sophie from the future? Yes, you are very quick to understand things. I came to the past to tell you in the future you and I got married, Bruce. We have a very active and satisfying sex life which led to the birth of our future child, Urage. That is the baby that Paul Marine is holding. He stole our baby. But why? Paul Marine stole our baby and traveled to the past so that he could use the baby as a lie to trick younger me into marrying him instead of saying it was actually the baby that he would have with me in the future. The past version of me believed all this because I married Paul Marine instead and no longer will even marry you at all. Oh, man. It's over, Bruce. We're married. Until death do you part. Bruce pulls out the time knife. Paul Marine pulls out his gun with time bullets inside. They have the best fight of any movie ever. At the end, Bruce has Paul Marine with a knife to his neck. It's been a slice. Bruce lifts his knife up to cut Paul Marine. You won't get me this easy! Paul Marine aims the gun at himself and shoots himself 30 times. The clip is bigger than a regular pistol. Paul disappears, but then 30 Paul Marines enter. I shot myself 30 times! So that I was sent back to many different times at the same time, which meant there were 30 of me! Now we're all here to kill you! Which means that each of you has a time bullet inside of you. Of course! But I made sure we were all shot in areas that have no vital organs, and we will get the bullets removed after we kill you. Unfortunately, For you, I traveled to the past earlier and took your gun and added an electric charge on each of your time bullets. I control the electric charges with this handheld detonator. No! Yes, it's quite shocking. Bruce presses his detonator. All 30 Palmerines are electrified from the inside. Their skin peels all over like sausages that are left on the barbecue for too long and then peel open all over. The Palmerines all die. Consider this my resignation. Oh yeah! God bless America! Bruce and Sophine make out. Sophine waits for a few seconds for the audience to stop applauding before she says her next line. Congratulations, you passed the test. What test? We always believed you were the chosen one, so we traveled to the past to test you and make sure. Now we believe you are ready to fight the ultimate villain from the future. Okay. So, who's the ultimate villain? His name is Paul Marine. But I just killed Paul Marine. No, the Paul Marine you have known this whole time is actually an actor from the future that we paid for the test. The actual Paul Marine is exactly the same, but he lives in the future. He was an actor, which means my job was fake as well. Yes, that is the only reason why you were kept in a low-level position for so many years without a single promotion, and it appears that people didn't give you the respect you clearly deserved, because it is in reality that you are the chosen one. It all makes sense now. We must travel to the future. Are you ready? Looks like it's time to find out. Bruce puts on his shades. George Washington waves the American flag. End of movie. Bruce Savage will return in Time Knife 2, The Recon.